I'm now going to look at the difficult job of seamless texture making. Now I've got a photo that I downloaded from the internet, and I'll demonstrate a few techniques I use on this. Now the secret to a good seamless texture is a nice uniformity. You need a balance across the texture, because anything that isn't balanced will just show up as tiling when you come to use it, and it's repeated across your course. So these leaves, for instance, here, you can't have a texture with a couple of leaves in, because when it's repeated, this leaf is going to be repeated on the next texture and on the next texture, and there's just going to be a line of them. They're all going to be in a straight line of dots, and you're going to notice this on your course. So you really need to remove anything that's unique, or multiply anything that's unique. So you can have a texture with lots of leaves all over the texture. That's fine if there was a leaf all the way evenly spread across this texture. It wouldn't be noticeable. Each leaf will just be lost in amongst the others. Or you can delete them completely and have no leaves, but you just can't have unbalanced odd things in your texture. The same goes for the actual grass on this texture. We've got a very lush green side here and a very brown side here, so we couldn't use that as a texture, because the two will just create stripes and lines again when they're repeated. So the main thing we use is a clone brush for removing anything that we need to change. So I'm just going to quickly demonstrate the clone brush. Now on Photoshop, you press the Alt key when you're on the clone brush, and a cross mark appears. You then click to select that particular area. So if I click there, it's now selected that particular part in my brush. You can see it stays there as I move, and whenever I press and hold the brush, it will start copying from that target to the new area. So I can get rid of that leaf there, you see, just press it, and then if I brush along, it will copy with the brush moving along from where it was down here. So if I click there and brush across, it will start copying from there, and it will copy all of this part along. Now if we copy too much in one go, we're just going to end up with a cloned part that looks very obviously copied. So what you have to do is just clone a small amount like that, and then pick a new area, clone a small amount, a new area, clone a small amount, and you just work your way around. And it's really just experience that teaches you when to move, what to pick to get the look you're after. But the clone brush will need to be set with the correct softness of edge for the job. So your brush has a hard or a soft edge, and this will create a blurred edge to the brush. So the softer the edge, the easier it is to blend in. If you use a very hard edge, if I switch this from 43% to 100 and click, you'll see a very, well, you probably can't see a very, it's quite, because this rough is so rough, it doesn't really show up. But if this was a smoother grass, you'd see it creates a very hard edge. So because it isn't showing up on here, it's probably best to use a harder brush, because the downside to the soft edge is that it creates like a blur. So the more you use the brush, the blurrier your texture will get. So use a brush as hard as you can without leaving too many lines. So I'll actually turn this brush up a bit, because it's looking fine with a harder edge there. But different pictures, you'll find you can't get away with a hard edge like this, so you'll have to use a softer one. So we work our way around, and we're just trying to create uniformity. So a bit of this edge down there. And that's much more usable as a texture. I need to get rid of that yellow leaf, so we'll pop that out. But that's getting towards what's usable as a texture. Now I'll save this over as a new one. Select all, copy, file new. Because I'm using copy, it will create a page the correct size, and I can just paste it. And I'll flatten the image. So that's our drier version. I'll now just do the same thing. I'll go back to the start, and I'll do the same thing with the lush side. I'll just create a quick version of lush grass. What you do find, if you go too far with a brush and the original target catches the edge, you'll get the lines of the edge of the picture. So that's another good reason to keep switching in short amounts. Don't try and go too far in one go, or you'll end up painting lines in from the side of the image. So that's that covered. There's some obvious, I'll make the brush a little bit smaller, there's some obvious clones there now because of the dark areas. So these dark parts, we've got a line form there of these dark bits, so I'd want to get rid of some of those, or create more dark areas in different shapes. You can combine them a bit. As I say, if you create enough of them, you won't notice them. The problem is when there's just one or two things that catch the eye. That's when the texture won't work. So we've got another texture that will work reasonably. We're still going to have a lot of work to do. Textures take a long time, but that's getting towards a texture that will work on as a seamless texture. So I'm now going to copy that, select all, go back to our original one, and I'm going to paste it on here. Now this is because one way of creating a nice mixed texture I use is using a eraser brush, and because we've got both the textures now, we've got the worn one and the grass lush one, we can create a much more balanced version that's got both in by erasing parts of this texture so that we can see the other texture underneath. So I use the eraser brush. If I click that and I set it to there's some brushes on Photoshop that are like scattered, a sort of scattered effect rather than a single brush. It's like lots of pieces, and if I set that quite large, I can use it to knock holes in this texture. If I just click a few times, it's actually creating holes through. If I deselect the background for a minute, you can see it's created holes in the green one, and we're seeing the drier grass of the other one coming through. It's perhaps not big enough to show you, even on its largest setting, so I might have to use a normal brush, but if I just set a normal brush with a sort of middle soft edge. You can see we could brush out parts of our green grass on the top image and let the brown of the underneath image show through, and this is an easy way to create a balanced texture, because we can go around and we can make the holes wherever we want. A perfectly round brush isn't really ideal, and this probably need a smaller brush and draw irregular shapes, but you get the idea. You can actually control where the brown is starting to show through. And it's much easier that way than using a clone brush to create a uniform mixture of the two textures. Create two separate ones and then mix them yourself like this. I find it far easier way of doing it. And you can also use this to mix two completely different photos that you've got together as well. So if you've got two grasses, slightly different colours, you can use this method to mix both grasses together just to give you a bit of variation, which is also good. I quite often mix textures that I've finished. I go through my textures and I quite often mix two of them together to create a new third texture. So that's the other technique I use. And one advantage with this method as well, because they're on separate layers, you can alter the colours separately as well. So if I select one, say the background, I can actually go to the controls, the hue, saturation, the colour, and I can completely change one of the textures. That's taking it to extremes, but I can lighten it, darken it, shift the colour, so I can create quite a lot of variation in looks just by shifting the colours around. That's more green, turning the more reddy brown colour. I can go grayer by desaturating a bit. So there's a lot you can do by keeping the bits on separate layers. So even if it doesn't look good when you first start mixing two, you'll quite often find that if you change the colours and the brightness, you can create some really good looking textures that way.